I want to talk to you a little bit, a few minutes this morning. We're not going to talk about George Bush. I simply want to set the stage for what I do want to talk about, and we'll get around to it in just a few moments. But what I want to focus on is the pomp and the ceremony that surrounded the 41st president's death. There were dignitaries that came from all over the world at this particular time. As I watched, every time I watch something like this, my mind always goes to the rich man and Lazarus, the comparison that exists sometimes in funerals where people are applauded. Now, President Bush, for all I know, may have deserved all the applause he got. I don't know one way or the other, and I'm not even going there. But I watched speaker after speaker as they spoke about the good things the president did. And I do know he did do a lot of good things during World War II. In the National Cathedral, people, as I said, from all over the world were gathered together to pay their respects to this man who had done so much. It was basically an assortment of who's who. I can't even catalog who all was there. I don't remember. His son, of course, Bush 43 as he's known, he was one of the speakers there at the cathedral. Bob Dole actually got up out of his wheelchair and saluted the former president, both military men during World War II. President Trump and his wife was there, as well as all the living presidents. It's interesting to see so many presidents alive at one time. 4 of them sitting together right here on this one bench. And then in addition to that, of course, there was Bush 43, that's 5, and then the body of his father, which was 6 presidents that were present, at least their bodies were. And it was a day when people gave their last respects. Many great things were said about this man. Vice President Pence addressed the assembly. And there were even movie stars and sports figures. One that we all know very well, Peyton Manning, was there, and there were many, many, many others. The president's dog made it. He was there and sat by the casket during this time. And there's a picture of President Bush back when he was a pilot in World War II. He was down twice. And one time they had to pick him up in a submarine. It's the only way they could get to him. But he was a war hero, and there's the 2 presidents. Only second time this ever happened, the father and son presidency. He was a very important man throughout his life, held a lot of distinguished jobs. There's a young Bush family, and then it multiplied, and then it multiplied again. What a family, huh? That would be a funeral all by itself. But in addition to his family, of course, there were people from all over the world. They were paying their last respects to a man who was despised by some, loved by others. I don't know what became of him. It's not my business. But what I would like to pay attention to is focusing our mind on the funeral and all the great things that were said about this man and what may have become of him beyond the veil. Sometimes we see life as being this, this is the sum total of life, and it's not even a drop in a bucket to what we're all about. We're going to exist much, much longer than our time here in this world. But sometimes we summarize, the dash between the date and all that stuff. That's just a fraction of our existence. But sometimes we can get it so wrong, things can be deceiving. The rich man and Lazarus is actually what I want to talk about. This is a story, an account, a historical account. Some people think it's a parable. I don't think so. I think it's something that Jesus actually knew about. He called this man by name, Lazarus, which he never does in parables. Parables are figures, something he made up in order to make a point, never use names. But in this particular account, he did call a man by name. It could have actually been somebody that these people knew. they would have been familiar with. He didn't call the rich man by name because that would have been embarrassing to the family. But it is quite possible that this thing could have happened in the lifetime of the people he was speaking to, and that they were actually familiar with the two men that were involved in the narrative, because he was trying to make a point. He wanted to make a point about what was important as opposed to the things that are much less important. The rich man and the beggar, by comparison, Lazarus was a nobody, right? He was a beggar. They laid him outside the rich man's gate. The rich man was a somebody. The beggar, he was, he was human trash. He was a pain. He was an obstacle. He was, in the way. You know how some people are just nuisances? Lazarus probably was seen as that. Some people would pick him up in the morning. They'd carry him to this gate, and they'd lay him there. And he'd beg. He'd sit there and beg all day. When I was in India, other men here have seen him as well. Beggars everywhere, sitting by gates, up against a fence, up against a wall that surrounds the compounds. Anywhere they think they might be able to get money. A lot of crippled people just sitting around. Somebody brought them there. They couldn't walk there. Somebody brought them. And that's what happened with this man. He might have given part of his money he collected. I don't know. But he had no way of taking care of himself. There was no Social Security system. And if he was going to have any sustenance by which he could continue to live, he was going to have to rely on the generosity of other people. And that's what he did. He'd lay at the gate, and he would beg for alms as people came through. He was unsightly. The rich man, on the other hand, there's a guy you wanted to know. People like, we like to know rich people or famous people. People get all excited about seeing rich or famous people. Sometimes people cuddle up to rich people. Even churches sometimes cater to rich people. James had to write about that in his short epistle, because there were some in the church that were kissing up to the rich, who were, in most cases, less godly than the ones they tended to snub, who were the more godly. They were looking at the rich as being important and the poor as being not important. I think this was probably the way it was at that time. It's pretty common. It's pretty common today. Nothing's changed. The rich are held up in high esteem, sometimes rightly so, like a president, yes. But sometimes it's just because they're rich. It's not necessarily because they've done anything that's really good, just because they got the right last name or whatever the case may be. Solomon asked one time, how does a wise man die? He answered it as the fool. Well, the point he's making, we could make this point to be the same. And how does a rich man die? Well, the same as the poor. In life we may be different. In death we're all the same. There's no difference. There's no rich man. There's no poor man. They're just two souls now. There's two bodies that remains behind. Shortly they're going to turn to dirt, and the two souls will, of course, go to be with God. The point Solomon's wanting to make is we spend our time so much while we are in this world trying to accumulate things of the world, and the bottom line is, when we die, we all die as equals. We got nothing. With the old saying, you don't see a U-Haul tied behind a hearse. Well, that's very true. A woman was buried in her car one time, and I don't know, I guess she thought she would enjoy it in eternity or something. Today is probably rusted out, I suppose. There's all kinds of ideas people have about life and death, but the bottom line is when we die, we're equal. There's no difference. In life, there's a difference because people make a difference. In death, there's no difference because God makes no difference. And we're all on a different footing at that time. It was written that the beggar died, and the rich man, he also died and was buried. As we read this story, one of the things that comes to my mind, at least, is the fact that this man was buried. And what a funeral it would have been, huh? Maybe about like a president. Maybe hundreds of people gathered together, Maybe the priest laid out the red carpet, come on in, we'll have the funeral. Maybe people got up and spoke, what a great man this was, what a great man this was, what a great man this was. And it went on and on and on, okay? That's the way sometimes funerals go. Sometimes people deserve a good eulogy. This fellow, on the other hand, he did not. But he probably got one, because he had 5 brothers still alive, and they probably were rich too. And of course the townspeople, they like to rub elbows with the rich and famous, and they just had all kinds of blubbery things to say about this man. I can imagine sometimes that they were gathered together in the local synagogue or coliseum or whatever, and they were paying respects to this man's body. The body was there. But the man they knew, he wasn't there. He wasn't there. He was gone. And we'll take a peek at him in just a moment. But the thing that does come to my mind is, what happened to the body of Lazarus? Nothing said about that. Jesus said nothing. It wasn't uncommon back then to take criminals and throw them into the dump. It's a place known as Gehenna, the Valley of Henna. That was the local dump in Jerusalem, and they would just take their bodies and throw them in the dump. Sometimes they had a pauper's cemetery where poor people were actually buried. What become of this man? We don't know. Nothing said about the body, whether he was thrown in the dump or whether he was buried in a pauper's hill or whatever. And in the narrative, the Lord doesn't even bring it up. Because the truth of the matter is, it really didn't matter what became of his body. It was over. So it was that the beggar died, and here's the difference, and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. Our Lord referred to this as a paradise in the book of Luke, chapter 23, verse 43. Paradise. When you think of paradise, I usually think of Hawaii, okay? Now, I don't expect paradise is going to look like Hawaii. But when I think of paradise, I think of something like Hawaii, just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful in my mind. I hear it's not so wonderful anymore. But back when I first used to think about Hawaii, it was. Don't care much for their senator. Anyway, back then, it was a paradise in my mind. But the point, I think, that Jesus wants to convey is that it's a wonderful place to be. Paradise. Okay? It's better than something that would be painful. It's better than here. Paradise is better than here. We've lost our loved ones who have gone to be with God, and I trust that they're in a better place today than they were when they were with us. I've often thought about some of the ones I love that are gone. If I had the opportunity to bring them back, I really wouldn't want to. So many times it's crossed my mind when Jesus was going to raise Lazarus, the Bible says he wept. And most everybody assumes that he wept because Mary and Martha was weeping. I've often wondered if he wept because he had to bring Lazarus back. Lazarus was in paradise. And Jesus is going to bring him back into this world. And it wouldn't be very long after, at least according to tradition, that Lazarus was stoned to death. Not long after the crucifixion of Jesus. They killed Jesus. They had to kill Lazarus because Jesus raised him from the dead. And I often wondered if the Lord actually cried because he was bringing Lazarus back from the dead, knowing what kind of a fate he was going to have to meet. He already had it made. He had it made. Now he's going to have to come back. Anyway, just a side note. Paradise. That's where this beggar went. This nuisance. He went to paradise. When you see a nuisance, when you see the scum of the earth, think about Lazarus. That's probably the way people saw him. Anyway, the rich man also died. He was buried. And now we find he is in torments. Things have changed. Lazarus is in paradise, the rich man in torments. And I've wondered, and it probably did happen, when all this great swelling talk was being done about this rich man, how great he was and what all he accomplished, at the very moment he was in torments. I've learned that when I've held funerals before. While I was speaking, the person I was speaking about, they were in paradise or torment. And here I am talking about them. And you know, their fate's already been sealed. They're either in paradise or torment. I don't know which one. Sometimes I think I might. But while I'm talking about them, at that very moment, they could be in paradise or torment. It's a frightening prospect when you speak at funerals for people of what actually could be. Anyway, the rich man, he wound up in torments. He's in a place that's called Hades. Hades is the realm or the place of the unseen. That's the meaning of it. Sometimes when people think of Hades, they think of hell. Used to avoid saying the word hell, people used to say they're in Hades. They meant hell, but they said Hades. Hades is not hell. The King James Bible is part of that confusion, because instead of translating the word Hades, they did use the word hell. From Acts chapter 2, many people think Jesus went to hell. Okay? He didn't go to hell. He went to Hades, and there's a big difference. He went to paradise with the thief, you recall. Today you shall be with me in paradise. Hades is the realm of the unseen. To the Jewish mind, it was a place where God kept spirits that were out of their bodies. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and verse 7, Solomon said, when death occurs, the body goes back to the dust from which it was formed. The spirit goes back to the God who gave it. Well, the question is, where did God keep the spirits? We know what happened to the bodies. Where are the spirits? Well, they're in Hades, the Hadean realm, the place of disembodied spirits. And what we can deduce from this is that there are at least two compartments. One is a paradise, arena of paradise, and the other would be a place of torments. And whenever a person dies, they go to one or the other. Well, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and he saw. He saw. His eyes were in the ground. Do spirits have eyes? Does God have eyes? We read about the all-seeing eye of God. I don't think God has eyes like you and I think of it. It's something different. What the rich man saw, he did in fact see. But how he's capable of seeing, I couldn't tell you if my life depended on it. I don't know what spirits look like. There's no description of a spirit in the scriptures. God is described in human terms so that we can get an inkling of what the authors are speaking about when they speak about God. So we can understand something about God. He lifted up his eyes and he could see. There was consciousness beyond death. And he saw Abraham afar off. And he cried out to him, Father Abraham. You know, Abraham lived about at least 700 years before this man was born. Probably more like 1,400 years before Abraham was born. Before Lazarus, rich man, was born. There were no Polaroid cameras. They didn't take any pictures. I've always wondered, how did he know this was Abraham? He could see, and he knew he was seeing the man Abraham. But how did he know that? I don't know. I just know he did. Sometimes we talk about, is there recognition on the other side? Oh, yeah. There's recognition. We know that the rich man could see into paradise. Now, we don't know that he could see anybody around him. Jesus describes the place of torments in terms like outer darkness or lake of fire, pain, suffering, and such things. The vision I've always got in my mind, because of the absolute blackness, is that you couldn't see who was on your right hand or your left hand. You could hear him, but you couldn't see. The rich man, however, he could see into paradise, and he saw and recognized Abraham. A lot of things to think about when we start thinking about these things, because the question is sometimes asked, will we know one another in heaven? Well, the answer to that question is yes. This isn't definitive, obviously, but there are a number of passages that do back up that statement I just made. Abraham was afar off, and there was Lazarus in his bosom. The bosom was a descriptive of being in a situation of paradise. He was being comforted, consoled by the aged patriarch. This is what the rich man saw. Their roles obviously were immediately reversed. The rich, well, he became poor, and the poor, he became rich. What people saw with their eyes wasn't what was. What they thought they knew, they didn't know at all. They thought Lazarus was the loser and the rich man was the winner. But the truth of the matter was, it was just the opposite. And they couldn't see it. It was obvious, it was apparent, but they didn't see it. Maybe if they had known God, they would have recognized that. Even in this world, they could have seen the difference. Our existence exists of two spheres, and we're all aware of that. It's the here and the later. And I've been living now 65 years. Seems like such a long time on the one hand, such a short time on the other hand. It seemed like it took a long time to get here. But looking back, it seems like a day before yesterday. But it seems like such a long stretch. And in reality, 65 years is a blimp. It's nothing. It's really nothing. What we do during that time is important. But as far as time itself, I got a feeling we're going to forget it. One of these days, we'll lose sight of it. That's the way things go. In the here, it's short-lived, and our memories will soon be gone. It won't be long. Nobody on earth will know my name, and nobody on the earth will care. I'll have great-grandchildren that could care less who John Mayberry is. I couldn't tell you what my great-great-grandfather's name is. I know my great-grandfather because I'm named after him. That's the only reason I know his name. We not only die, but people forget we ever lived. It's as though it didn't even matter. We're gone. And we are forever gone. In Job 18:17, Bildad said, the memory of the dead perishes from the earth. And it really does. And it doesn't take long. It doesn't take long at all. And he has no name among the renowned. I've got folks living today that wouldn't know me if they walked up to me and saw me. Different world today. It's a more impersonal world, but very different. But the memory of this time is short-lived, and it soon fades away. What does count, on the other hand, is what's yet to come, because that's eternal, forever and ever. Why do we focus on the here and now so much when it is so brief and ultimately so insignificant, other than what we did as individual people, when we've got forever in front of us, soon to be ours? The rich man was forewarned. He knew better. When he asked Abraham to send Lazarus back to talk to his 5 brothers, Abraham said, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. There are no special messengers coming. The stories on Hallmark aren't coming true. There are no divine angels that's going to come down and get us to do what we need to do. We're on our own, except for the Lord helping us. but we're on our own, and we got to figure it out for ourselves. They had Moses and the prophets to guide them. Today we've been forewarned because we have Jesus and his prophets. Therefore, let us hear them. Everything we need to know is contained within Scripture. And we don't need anything more than that. The Lord said, the words that I speak to you are spirit, and they are life. Life forever. Jesus wasn't telling a fictitious story. That's not what he had on his mind at all. He was telling us of what's coming. This is the it of life. When it's all said and done, we're going to spend eternity in anguish and suffering, as so many have already done. Begun, I should say. Or we can spend our time in paradise. I don't think it should be a hard decision. If we believe God, I don't think it would be a hard decision. It's not hard for me. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? Someone will speak words over you. You lie in a casket, most likely, unless the Lord comes back first. The real question is, where will you be while they speak? Where will you be in eternity? If you desire the forgiveness of God, we hope and you'll come and let us assist you. If you're not a Christian, we can help you be one today. If you believe and are willing to repent, you can be immersed in water and be forgiven by God. If you're a saint and you need the prayers of God's people on your behalf, we hope you'll come. Let us do that while it is called today, while we stand and while we sing.